Man rescues leopard cub, stuck in swamp, but when he brings it to shore, something shocking happens. The desperate mewing cut through the morning mist like a knife. A sound so raw and urgent that Dr. Samuel Reyes stopped mid-step on the narrow boardwalk that wound through the Okavango Delta wetlands. He had been tracking the seasonal movements of red-billed quelea for the past 3 weeks. His binoculars trained on the massive flocks that darkened the sky above the reed beds, but this cry belonged to no bird he knew. The sound came again, higher pitched and more frantic, echoing across the dark water from somewhere deep within the labyrinth of papyrus and sedgegrass that stretched endlessly in all directions. Samuel lowered his field notebook and listened, with the practiced attention of someone who had spent 15 years interpreting the language of African wilderness. The call was feline, unmistakably so, but small and young, carrying the particular desperation that only comes from genuine terror. It rose and fell in irregular intervals, sometimes trailing off into exhausted whimpers before building again to a keening wail that made his chest tighten with recognition of suffering. Following the sound meant leaving the relative safety of the research station's marked trails and venturing into the treacherous heart of the swamp, where channels appeared and disappeared with the seasonal floods, where one wrong step could mean sinking into bottomless mud or disturbing a territorial hippopotamus. But the cries continued, growing weaker with each repetition, and Samuel found himself securing his equipment and stepping carefully from the boardwalk onto the uncertain ground of the marsh's edge. The water was knee-deep and surprisingly warm, filled with the rich scent of decomposing vegetation and the sharp tang of minerals drawn from deep earth. Samuel moved with deliberate care, testing each foothold before committing his weight, using a fallen branch as a probe to gauge the depth and stability of the murky bottom. The papyrus towered above him, creating a green cathedral that filtered the morning light into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. As he drew closer to the source of the distress calls, the vegetation began to thin, revealing a small clearing where recent floods had carved out a temporary island no larger than a kitchen table. On this precarious refuge, soaked and shivering, crouched a leopard cub whose spotted coat was matted with mud and whose pale green eyes held the wild panic of a creature that understood its own mortality. The cub couldn't have been more than 3 months old, still possessing the oversized paws and rounded features of infancy, but already showing the muscular promise of the apex predator it would one day become. The island was dissolving beneath the cub's weight, chunks of earth breaking away with each small movement and disappearing into the dark water that surrounded this last refuge. Samuel could see that the water level had risen since the cub's arrival, probably trapping it during the night when it had sought higher ground from some other danger. Now the morning sun was accelerating the erosion, and the small creature's desperate attempts to maintain its footing were only hastening the collapse of its temporary sanctuary. The cub's mewing had become almost continuous now, a heartbreaking litany of fear and exhaustion as it pressed itself against the single acacia sapling that grew from the center of the crumbling island. Its small claws dug frantically into the soft earth each time a section gave way, sending ripples across the still water that reflected the morning sky like a broken mirror. "Easy there, little one," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible, above the gentle lapping of water against the dissolving shore. The researcher stood waist-deep in the swamp, calculating distances and dangers, understanding that he was looking at a creature balanced on the finest edge between survival and tragedy, whose next few minutes would determine whether this story ended in rescue or became another quiet loss in the endless arithmetic of the wild. Samuel's first step toward the crumbling island sent a gentle wave across the dark water, and the leopard Cub's pale green eyes locked onto his with the intensity of a creature evaluating its final options. The young animal's body language shifted from pure panic to wary assessment, its small head tilting as it processed this new variable in its desperate equation for survival. Every muscle in the cub's compact frame remained coiled with tension, ready to spring in any direction, though there was nowhere left to go. The researcher moved with the deliberate patience of someone who understood that one sudden gesture could transform rescue into tragedy. Each step through the murky water was calculated, his feet probing the soft bottom for stable purchase, while his eyes remained fixed on the cub's face, reading the subtle signs that would tell him whether he was being perceived as salvation or as another threat. The water grew deeper as he approached the center of the clearing, reaching his chest and making each movement slower, more laborious. The cub's mewing had evolved into something softer but more continuous, a low thrumming vocalization that seemed to express both fear and a desperate hope that this approaching figure might offer deliverance. Its small paws scrambled for new purchase as another section of the island dissolved into the swamp, leaving it balanced on an area no larger than a dinner plate. The acacia sapling bent under the cub's shifting weight, its thin trunk the only thing preventing a fall into water that would mean certain drowning for such a young animal. Samuel paused when he was still 10 feet away, allowing the cub time to process his presence without feeling cornered. The morning light filtering through the papyrus revealed the full extent of the young leopard's predicament. Its golden coat was not just matted with mud, but bore the scratches and cuts of a night spent clawing at crumbling earth, fighting for every inch of solid ground. Exhaustion radiated from its small frame, visible in the slight tremor of its legs and the way its head occasionally dipped before snapping back up with renewed alertness. The delicate negotiation between human and animal played out in the language of movement and stillness. Samuel extended one hand slowly toward the water's surface, palm down, allowing the cub to see that he carried no tools or restraints. The gesture was both offer and question, a way of asking permission to come closer without using words the young animal could never understand. The cub's response was to press itself lower against the sapling, but its eyes never left Samuel's face, and its mewing continued in what seemed almost like conversation. Another chunk of the island broke away, this time large enough to cause visible panic in the cub's posture. Its claws extended fully as it fought to maintain balance, and Samuel realized that the negotiation phase was ending whether either of them was ready or not. He moved forward again, each step bringing him closer to an animal whose instincts told it to flee from humans, but whose circumstances offered no alternative to trust. The water was now chest-deep on Samuel, and he could feel the current created by the dissolving island pulling gently at his clothes. The cub was less than 6 feet away, close enough that he could see the individual whiskers on its small muzzle and the way its nostrils flared with each rapid breath. The young leopard's ears swiveled constantly, processing every sound in the swamp around them, but its gaze remained locked on the human who represented its only chance for survival. "That's it, little one," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle sounds of water and settling earth. Almost there now. The cub's body language underwent a subtle shift as Samuel's voice reached it, the rigid terror softening into something that might have been cautious hope. The final 3 feet of water separated them now, and both species understood that the next few moments would determine whether this encounter ended in rescue or tragedy. The morning sun climbed higher above the papyrus, casting longer shadows across the water as the last stable ground beneath. The cub's pause began its inevitable surrender to the hungry swamp. The rescued cub's small body felt impossibly fragile. against Samuel's chest as he waded through the final stretch of water toward the solid ground of the marsh's edge. The young leopard had gone quiet during the transfer, its exhaustion finally overcoming fear as it pressed itself against the warmth of human clothing. Tiny claws, finding purchase in the fabric of Samuel's field vest. Each step brought them closer to safety, and the researcher found himself planning the logistics of getting this orphaned animal to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center 2 hours away. That low, rumbling growl from the forest edge stopped Samuel mid-stride, the sound rolling across the water with unmistakable authority. His blood chilled as he recognized the deep, primal warning of an adult leopard, and his eyes swept the tree line desperately for the source. The cub in his arms had gone rigid at the sound, its small head turning toward the shadows beneath the fever trees with an alertness that spoke of recognition rather than fear. She emerged from the dappled darkness like a manifestation of the wild itself. Her spotted coat blending so perfectly with the interplay of light and shadow that Samuel's eyes struggled to hold her form even as she moved into clearer view. The female leopard was magnificent in her prime. Powerful shoulders rolling beneath golden fur as she approached the water's edge with the measured confidence of an apex predator. Her amber eyes never left Samuel's face, but there was no aggression in her gaze, only an ancient intelligence that seemed to be evaluating his intentions with surgical precision. The revelation came in stages, each more astonishing than the last. First, 2 more cubs emerged from the undergrowth behind their mother. Smaller versions of the one Samuel carried, their movements still bearing the characteristic clumsiness of youth. They stayed close to their mother's flanks, occasionally mewing softly as they processed this strange scene unfolding before them. The family resemblance was unmistakable. The rescued cub was no orphan, but a member of this intact family unit. Samuel understood then what had truly transpired during the long night. The mother had been present all along, watching from the safety of solid ground as her cub became trapped on the dissolving island. Her decision not to attempt to rescue herself had been calculated rather than callous, recognizing that her greater weight would only hasten the island's collapse and likely result in 2 drownings instead of 1. She had waited through the dark hours, trusting in possibilities she could not control. "Your baby's safe," Samuel whispered, his voice thick with wonder at what he was witnessing. The mother leopard's response was to sink into a relaxed crouch at the water's edge, her tail switching slowly as she watched Samuel wade the final distance to shore. When he knelt and gently placed the rescued cub on dry ground, she rose and padded forward, her rough tongue immediately beginning the work of cleaning her offspring, while the 2 other cubs pressed close in a reunion that needed no human interpretation. The evening wind stirred the papyrus as the leopard family melted back into the forest, 4 spotted forms disappearing into shadows that had briefly revealed one of nature's most profound acts of trust.